Okay, hello again. This is our new week. We have gone a lot in fractions, and now we're going to talk about decimals versus fractions. Some of you, this may be a review. Some of your teachers did it earlier in the year, some did not. So I want to make sure that everybody got it, and just to make sure that we're good on it. And because this is something that is very critical to future classes, that you really understand this concept. So we're going to do decimals versus fractions. Let's see here. Okay, so the definition of a decimal and a fraction here. So fraction is a number quantity that is not a whole number. So like if we had 3/4 of something, that means we have less than one whole. We have 3 out of 4 pieces of a whole. We would need 4 out of 4 to make the whole. A decimal is a fraction. I loved how they used the word fraction in the definition, whose denominator is a power of 10 and whose numerator is expressed by figures placed to the right of the decimal point. So these two are actually equal, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So decimals and fractions are related to each other. There are different ways to write them, and they can mean the same exact thing here. So a little bit of review here, place value review. You guys have done this before. I think earlier in the year you rounded to the certain place values and stuff like that. So here are your place values. You've got your decimal point. This is like your starting point right here. And you've got your ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. You learned that like in, I don't know, second grade or something. So that is something that you've done for a while. And then you should have at least seen these things up to hundreds. I don't think we go higher than hundreds till middle school. But the tenths, the first decimal place is the tenths. The second one is the hundredths, the third one's the thousands, and then 10,000s, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger in there. You can have decimals that go on forever and ever and ever and never end. But for today, we're going to talk about tenths and hundredths. That's our goal. So writing these as a fraction and a decimal. So there's actually two different ways to write numbers. So when I say 7/10, because of what we've been doing, you should say, okay, 7/10 is 7 out of 10. And so we have 7 parts out of 10 total pieces, so 7/10. But you can also write it as a decimal, and 7/10, since tenths is the first place value, then you would have 0.7. That's two different ways to write that same number. Both of those mean 7/10. So if I say 0.7, it is 7/10. If I have a fraction, I have 7/10. Same thing with 78/100. 78/100, since we've been doing fractions, that is 78/100. We have 78 pieces out of 100 as our whole. But it could also be written as a decimal. So hundredths is our second decimal place. And so 78/100 I could write as 0.78 because the 8 is in our hundredths place. So that's how that would be read. We don't. And I'm pretty bad about it too. I usually say 0.78, but the proper way to say this is 78/100. 5 and 3/100. So we just talked about mixed fractions. So 5 and 3/100. So I have 3 pieces out of 100, 3/100. But I could also write this as a decimal. So I would have 5, because that's my whole number. So the ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, those are my whole numbers. And then my fraction is 3/100. Well, 3/100 is the second place. So I would need to put a 0 here and then a 3. So those two are equivalent to each other. 5 and 3/100 is the same as 5.03. They're actually both said 5 and 3/100. So hopefully this is a little bit of a review for you. Hopefully this is anything new. It shouldn't be that difficult. It's kind of not too bad of a concept. So why are 5 pieces? That doesn't match anything that I've been saying. So why is that a true statement? So we just talked about how we can write decimals and fractions. So 3/4 and 0.75. So 0.75 is the hundredths. It's 2 decimal places. So 75/100, which actually reduces. Okay, so what goes into 75 and 100? Well, 25 does. So I can divide by 25. I can divide by 25. 75 divided by 25 is 3. 100 divided by 25
is 4. Therefore, these two are equal. You could also go backwards. Okay, 3/4. Now what we just said is the definition of a decimal is a fraction that has a power of 10 as its denominator. So if I have 3/4, I can't convert 3/4 into a decimal right off the bat. I have to get that denominator, it's like doing the common denominators. I have to get it to a 10, a 100, a 1000. I can't get 4 into 10. So what about 100? Can I get 4 to be 100 instead? And I can, because I can multiply by 25. If I multiply the denominator by 25, I have to multiply the numerator by 25. So 3 times 25 is 75. Now this can be written as a decimal, just like we did on the previous slide. It's hundredths is the second decimal place, so 0.75. 10 cents, think about 10 cents here. I've got a dime, 10 cents. So what fraction is a dime of a dollar? So how many dimes do I need to make a dollar? Count it up, 10, 20, 30, 40, keep going till you get to a dollar. How many dimes do I need? I need 10 dimes to make a dollar. So what fraction of a dollar is a dime? Okay, so what fraction, if I have 1 dime, what fraction of a dollar do I have? I need 10 total, and I have 1. So if I have a dime, I have a 10th of a dollar. And then how do we write a dime as a decimal? Money was something you learned a while back. I don't know exactly what grade you have learned how to write it as a decimal, but let's say I had $5.10. I would write that as $5.10. Money is decimal. Okay, that's exactly what money is. So $5.10, because this is my 10th. I have 1/10. Now this zero doesn't have to be there, but money, we count money in hundredths because everything at, we got dollar is 100 cents. So you always have 2 decimal places when you're talking about money. So that's why that zero's there. So we have zeros there when we deal with money. We have 2 decimal places all the time. But this is $5.10, so 5.10.
Okay, 1 cent. Let's change my color. Okay, 1 cent. What fraction is a penny of a dollar? So how many pennies does it take to make a dollar? How many pennies do you have to make $1? You have to have 100. Okay, 100 pennies is going to give you $1. So what fraction is a penny of a dollar? We just said we had to have 100 of them. So the fraction would be 1 penny is 1/100th of a dollar. Because if you have 1 penny, then you need 99 more to make up a whole dollar. So you've got 1 out of the whole 100 that you need. And then how do we write that as a decimal? Same thing, if I had $5.01, I would say $5.01. Now notice these two. Putting that 1 in a certain place makes a huge difference. Okay, if it's the first decimal, that's a 10th, so that's a dime. If I put it in the second place, that's a 100th, so that's a penny. So those zeros and the placement and stuff really do make a big difference. I think you'd rather have 10 cents than 1 cent because you'd have more money. And that's going to come into play on Wednesday's video, is figuring out which ones are bigger and less than. Okay, and then let's look at the quarter. Okay, so 25 cents a quarter. So what fraction is a quarter of a dollar? How many quarters do you need to make a dollar? Well, if you were counting it out, how many quarters would you need to make a dollar? You would need 4 quarters. Okay, so what fraction is a quarter of a dollar? It's 1 out of 4, because you have 1 quarter, you need 4 to make a whole. But we just talked about, this isn't a 10, I can't convert this to a decimal. So if you're thinking about how many cents is in a quarter is 25 cents out of how many cents? 100. 100 cents make a dollar. But these two things are equivalent to each other. I can multiply by 25, multiply by 25. These two are equivalent fractions, so that's perfectly fine. And when I write this as a decimal, if I have $5, this is $5,
if I have $5.25, I do $5.25. I have 5 and 25/100ths of a dollar. Okay, so this is my 2 decimal places, my 100th place.
Should be pretty easy. I'm going to have you write back and forth. I'm going to have you do some problems and write them as a decimal, and then I'm going to give you some decimals and have you write them as fractions. So if I want to write a decimal or a fraction as a decimal, you look at your denominator. So my denominator is 10. My denominator is 10. So that means I'm going to put point, and some people like to put a 0 out in front. I forget a lot of the time. You don't have to have a 0, but I'm going to try to remember to do it for you guys so you kind of get used to it so it doesn't look weird. So you can put a 0 out there, don't have to. But since we're doing the 10th, remember the 10th is that first decimal. Okay, it goes tenths and then hundredths. So 10th is the first one, 100th is the second one. And so I'm going to put a 0 because I don't have a whole number. And then my denominator is 10 and my numerator is 5. So I'm going to put 0.5 and that is my answer. Pretty simple here, okay? And if you think about that, 5 out of 10 is 1/2. 0.5 is 1/2. Okay, all those things kind of match each other. Okay, 1 7/10. Now you have a whole number. So the whole number goes in front, okay, because it's just part, it's not really part of the decimal or the fraction, it's the whole number out there. So put it in front, and then 7/10. 10th is my first decimal place, so I'm going to put the 7 in my first decimal place, and there's my answer. Okay. Let's look at these other two with hundredths. Now my denominator is 100th. Now 100th is the second decimal place. So if I have a decimal, or my first one is the 10th, my second one is the 100th. And they go on and on and on. But for right now in 5th grade, 100th is as far as you have to go. You'll learn the rest later. So since this is 100th, I want that second decimal place to be where I end. And so I'm going to put a point. You can put a 0 in front of it if you want. You don't have to. And I would do 45. Okay, so that 5 is in the hundredths place. So you got 45 hundredths. Same thing when there's a whole number there. I'm going to put 1 point, okay, put my decimal in there, and then 90 100ths. So 100ths is the 2 decimal places. So I would put 90 here. Now I do not have to put the 0 after there. A lot of times you will not see people do that. You'll just see them write it as 1.9, which is fine also. Because notice this reduces. I can actually divide this by, and you can reduce it when it divides by 10s. So I can divide this by 10, divide this by 10. So 1 and 9/10. These two are equivalent to each other. So I can put 1 and 90 100ths, or I can put 1 and 9/10. Same thing, okay? Because you see how we reduce that fraction and we still have a power of 10 as our denominator. Okay, decimals have to have denominators that are powers of 10. I couldn't reduce it to a 5 because that wouldn't work. It's not a 10th, it's not a 100th, it's not a multiple of 10. Okay, and then I'm going to have you go backwards. I'm going to give you some decimals and I'm going to have you write them as fractions. So look at your decimal place. I have 1 decimal here, so that's a 10th. Okay, so 1 decimal place is a 10th. So I'm going to write 3/10, and that's my answer. Okay, if there's a whole number there, I'm going to put it out in front just like we did last week with our whole numbers. And then I have 1 decimal place, which is also a 10th. So I'm going to write 7/10, and that's my answer. Okay, notice on the right side I have 2 decimal places. So when I have 2 decimal places, that is the 100th. Okay, that's my 100th place. And so since there's 2 of them, my denominator is going to be 100. I've got 2 zeros. Over here I have 1 decimal place, I have 1 0, 2 zeros. And then I put the 57 as my numerator. So that's my answer. Should be pretty easy, hoping. Okay, 7.79. So that is 7 79 hundredths because I'm in my second decimal place, my 2 decimal places. So I'm gonna put my whole number out front, and then my denominator is going to be 100 because I am in my second decimal place, so I need 2 zeros. and then 79 is my numerator. So that is my answer when I'm writing it as a fraction. I put examples on your worksheet. This is the first page of the worksheet, just like we've been doing. So the first page of the worksheet is numbers 1 through 20. That goes with today's video. And then on Wednesday, I'll release the second video, which is numbers 21 through 30. It seems like a lot of problems, I know, but they're actually very easy, and I think it'll go very fast. If you need any help with the first half of the worksheet, I have Zoom tutoring on Monday and Tuesday. And then I have tutoring on Thursday and Friday to finish up the worksheet. The worksheets are due by Friday at noon. And I really want to turn them next so I don't have to work on them on the weekend. But if you don't get them done, if something happens this week and you can't get them done, make sure you have them done by Monday morning when I release a new video, because I do release the answers on Monday. And once I release the answers, I won't take your worksheets anymore. So just, if you have problems getting them done by Friday, that's fine. Just get them to me on before Monday noonish. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. You can email me. You can come to my Zoom. And I will talk to y'all later. Bye.